welcome. I'm Andy Tromans, Associate Director at CIPFA Penna, where I recruit CFOs, finance directors, finance leaders across the public sector. It's really great to have around, we have 50 of you or so registered for today's for this webinar, Public Finance Leadership. It's great to have so many of you on the call at the moment. Thank you very much for making the time. Today we're going to be talking about public finance leadership and career progression. I know from talking to you and your colleagues that many, if not all of you, operating in a really demanding environment. Words that often come up in conversations, words like tough and relentless. Paradoxically, that's often when career opportunities open up, especially for people who are ready to step forward, show impact, and progress. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're try and find some silver lining in the current clouds and some pros that balance out the cons. So we're going to do two things. We're really fortunate, first off, to have a CFO here with us today, Sarfraz Nawas. So thanks very much for joining us, Sarfraz. And first off, we'll hear an account of his career journey. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of that. And then we'll also have a look at the current market and how recruitment is working right now. There'll be a Q&A opportunity after each session, so please do save your questions till then or drop them in the chat. Please don't hold back with your questions. That's often one of the most interesting aspects of a webinar like this. You get out what you put in, and it ensures that we're addressing the issues and topics that are most relevant to you. We've scheduled, I think about an hour and a half has been scheduled actually for this session. But I think what's more realistic, in case you're worried about other priorities or commitments you've got this evening, it's probably going to be about 15 to 20 minutes plus per session, plus the two Q&A opportunities on top. So we'll probably get done in around about 60 minutes, an hour or so. So if everyone's good to go, let's start off with our guest CFO, Sarfraz. Sarfraz, for those who don't know you, could you please introduce yourself and
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your career to date?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarfraz Nawas. I'm currently Chief Finance Officer for Wakefield Borough Council. Have been in post just over a few weeks now. So my career has largely been public sector. So I'll kind of do it from front to back, if that makes sense. So before joining Wakefield Section 151, I worked in the civil service. I was a CFO for the National Citizen Service for a few years. It's for those that may not know it, because it is a bit of a niche ALB, or was a niche ALB. It's basically a department for culture, media, and sports, arm's length body, providing youth experiences, a bit like Duke of Ed. But as is the way in the current climate, kind of funding cuts meant government funding ceased, and kind of my role was largely to oversee the wind down of that organisation. Prior to that, I worked in water regulation. I was the CFO for Ofwat, the water regulator, so another arm's length body of government. So did that for about five and a half years, and kind of oversaw a massive change in regulation of the water sector in that period. Prior to that, did a stint in the NHS. For those of you that work in the NHS, I have a huge amount of admiration. It's a very challenging landscape, and interestingly, one of the most political environments I worked in my career. But going right back to my roots, I actually started my career in local government. So I kind of trained as a CIPFA graduate trainee at the London Borough of Hounslow. I'm not from London. I'm actually from the Midlands, so kind of have done stints south and north, and equally in the Midlands. And basically my career has largely been working in finance, but kind of working in transformation. You know, the kind of line I always share is I started working in local government a month before the financial crash. So pretty much all I've known is change, and kind of change management, and austerity across local government, but also and public sector. So I've yet to see the years where kind of public services are awash with money and kind of ability to kind of talk about growth, etc. Alongside the day job, I've had a non-executive career. So I am currently a vice chair of Robert Jones Orthopaedic Hospital. It's a specialist hospital, as it says, specializing in orthopedics, and I oversee the finance and performance committee, but also sit across some of the commercial aspects of that organization, and oversee the running of the hospital. And I've also done stints as a college governor, so overseeing trusts, so overseeing college independent trusts, that again managing the finances and seeing them through special measures through to being rated as outstanding by Ofsted. That's part of history. I'm sure we'll get into more of it, Andrew, but yeah, that's my bio.
No, thanks, Sarfraz. That's a really helpful start. So, yeah, solely finance career. Was finance something that you always wanted to get into from when you were, primary school, or something that developed, perhaps following a parent or family member into the career, or something that developed later on in your academic life?
Yeah, I don't come from a very academic family, my parents were economic migrants, so kind of didn't really have a kind of school education. My real interest kind of stemmed in finance, more from financial strategy. I've said this in multiple interviews and I get laughed at. I'm not a numbers person, and people laugh thinking I'm joking. I'm not actually joking. I'm genuinely kind of not interested in spreadsheets. I'm interested in how we utilize finances to basically drive change. Um, it's a good question how it started out. For some reason, I don't know why, but I've always been interested in politics. So kind of I used to
Right.
be, sitting there watching Question Time on a Thursday evening during my school years. So I've always been interested in kind of policy making, and my degree was in business and public policy. And really kind of fell into finance a little bit. I was like, well, money is at the cornerstone of everything, right? And in essence, kind of how you utilize money really helps drive decision making. So that coupled with kind of being interested in how things get done, kind of, gave me a bit more leaning to, well, I mean, maybe I should forge a career in finance, because you're then at the cornerstone of decision making. You're then at the table when everything, whenever decisions need to be made about delivery, etc. So I'd say I kind of fell into it more than kind of actively looked into it, but since then I've kind of really used it to do exactly that, which is basically be party to the decisions that, kind of have real impact in the world.
It's interesting that point you make about not being a numbers guy. I think the biggest, in fact, we'll come on to this in the second part, Fiona, when you turn the tables and quiz me. The biggest trap that a lot of step-up finance candidates fall into when they're going from a deputy or assistant director role into the hot seat is not appreciating that it's no longer about the numbers so much. It's more about the narrative, the communication, the politics, the relationships. So that's
Absolutely.
really, yeah, obviously it's played to your strengths through your career. So at what point, Sarfraz, did you sort of start to see yourself more as a manager and a leader rather than an accountant or a specialist?
Um, Probably quite early on, if I'm honest. That I kind of always did the numbers to serve a purpose. So kind of,
Yeah.
one of my earlier rotations when I was doing my graduate scheme was as business partner. And that's where I realized actually I enjoy the people side of it. And naturally kind of enjoy the people side of it. You kind of then get to, develop from managing teams and leading teams. Um, I never, I was also quite fortunate in terms of, as soon as I qualified, I'd already secured a finance manager role looking after the region department of the council. It's quite daunting in one respect at the time. If I look back, I had a bit of imposter syndrome, kind of in my mid-20s managing, quite a, what I'd say, kind of mature finance team, with individuals probably older than my parents. So kind of um, what's the word, a deep end landing into leadership. And actually, what I'd say is that really shaped and molded my leadership style. I couldn't go in with kind of gravitas and kind of a length of experience of kind of working life behind me. Kind of went in with a bit of humility and kind of wanting to work with people and treating people like adults. Working on kind of basic principles around trust and kind of giving people autonomy and hoping they kind of respond to that. And yeah, so I'd say kind of my leadership style kind of really developed given the exposure I was given to it quite early on in my career.
And was there at any point a sort of a catalyst, a moment that acted as a catalyst or a sliding doors moment where things changed or things suddenly became apparent?
Yeah, I think when I moved to the NHS. I was probably what 7 years into my working career at that point, and managed a real kind of broad, diverse team. Um, and I think at that point, kind of had worked in a number of organizations and led a number of teams. And I think up until that point, I probably felt a level of imposter syndrome, or kind of still felt
Yeah.
like I was learning, and still felt like, right, what is my leadership style, right? How do I kind of get things done, and still maybe lacked confidence in my leadership ability. I think kind of going into the NHS environment, working with a team that, let's just say, wasn't cohesive. Didn't have steady leadership, didn't feel like they'd been communicated, and kind of lacked morale, if I'm honest. Um, I think kind of that situation, had that happened about 3, 4 years early in my career, I think would have been quite daunting and quite intimidating. But I suppose kind of having learnt my learnt my stripes and learnt my leadership style kind of in local government before that, I kind of went in with a bit of confidence, having seen some of that come through to fruition. Kind of when you leave, it's very evident in terms of your popularity, right? And kind of
Yeah.
feedback that people give you, kind of says a lot, I think, about you, in terms of, well, you may not get along with people, but do people respect you? Kind of, have you got good relationships? Kind of, frankly, it's a bit like a popularity contest in my view sometimes when you leave, in terms of how many people sign your leaving card. But generally, I think I had a lot of people, with no ulterior motive, reach out and kind of share, positive around how I'd help them develop within the team, and kind of with peers, and kind of, how a refreshing approach they felt I'd kind of brought to finance, and kind of something they had experienced. So I think that kind of gave me that kind of confidence and endorsement, almost, that actually, yeah, keep doing what I was doing, because it worked and it delivered. And so it's kind of, therefore, going into that NHS environment, I suppose, kind of, it was really right, okay, stick with this, it will work. And kind of, I'm glad to say, it did. Kind of very much left an organization where, people felt morale, and I'm not egotistical. I know I'm speaking here in terms of quite a public forum, and kind of talking about my career, but I'm generally not somebody who's spoken, or kind of speaks from an ego perspective. But just to give you an example, there were people in tears when I was leaving, and that kind of, and not tears of joy, by the way, either. And that was quite endearing in one respect, but also kind
Yeah.
of show the impact I'd had on that team in, in a 2-year period.
And is that because you think you have the confidence to just be yourself, to be authentic and genuine, Sarfraz, or something different?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, there's, for me, a lot to be said about that in terms of leadership. So kind of, some of my nuggets are, be yourself now. Kind of, sometimes, yes, there's a bit of kind of moderation, but I think if you have if you have the right values, if you have a level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, I think that goes very far in leadership roles. And I'm, the natural accountant in me is always triangulating, right? Kind of triangulate action with impact, and kind of how does that go down? So I think that kind of, yeah, was absolutely at the heart of kind of, some of that confidence going into it, is that, it works for the majority. Now, that said, it won't always work in every situation. Sometimes, I've had to go in teams, and that approach hasn't worked, hasn't resonated. And that's where you kind of modify and kind of course correct, or you kind of realize, well, we've got to try something different. And I think that kind of having that toolkit of range of different leadership styles, I think, is important. But for me, in the main, kind of knowing what your true leadership, default leadership style is really important.
Thanks, Sarfraz. You mentioned obviously you've worked across a number of sectors or areas in the public sector. Was that something you planned, or it's happened by chance? Is something you found straightforward to achieve? I mean, often, just to speak from a recruiter's perspective, we find that clients tend to be quite risk averse, so often like to recruit people from their sector, from the neighbouring organisation, or just down the road. But obviously, you've managed to give people that confidence that it's worth looking at something perhaps beyond the what you might call the usual suspects in terms of the stereotypical candidate.
Yeah, yeah, and it's definitely something I planned. I joined, local government, like I said, not really having role models or peers or family members that kind of worked in a professional setting environment. I remember kind of when I went in as a graduate, London was always felt me for like a temporary move. But as is the way, right, you can obviously go into an organization, you learn, and actually kind of the organization worked. I think one of the key people and a mentor I'd say in my early years I met was somebody who'd been there for 37 years. And I jokingly, although there's a slight seriousness, said to him, I was like, I ain't never doing 37 years in one organization. That's just not in my makeup. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've got absolutely no qualms with that, but it just didn't feel like that was what I wanted to do. Um, Equally, I'm somebody who's highly independent, so kind of feeling locked in by a pension or by a sector wasn't something that kind of felt natural to me. So, me moving sectors has always been deliberate. Um, I've always wanted to challenge myself. Interestingly, I think a few recruiters have said to me, "Oh, you can't change jobs and sorry, you can't change sectors and get promoted. It just doesn't happen." And I kind of took that slightly personally and as a challenge to say, "Well, yeah, just watch me."
Yeah, there's
And
nothing there's nothing so motivating as wanting to prove someone wrong, is there sometimes?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And don't get me wrong, they haven't lived rent free in my head, but there was a level of, well, I've got a level of confidence that, I think if you've got the right skills, right abilities, you've got those transferable skills and you're able to evidence that, there's no reason why having, a diverse approach to something, doesn't work. Don't get me wrong, majority of the times you're absolutely spot on. Kind of generally organizations will tend to want to recruit, but you do find those nuggets of organizations that actually want to do something differently. And I think that's that growth mindset, that's the kind of culture and organizations I want to work within. So it's almost like a matchmaking site. Somebody that has that open mindset is exactly the type of organization that I want to be in.
So have you got any tactics or anything you can share, Sarfraz, around how you um, like a coping strategy, or how you bounce back or reframe failure when perhaps you don't get the offer or don't get the job you wanted?
Yeah, I think it's again, people probably sense it from me. I'm always trying to get feedback. I'm always trying to understand, right, how can I improve? What can I do better? So when I've had those knockback, it's always, well, kind of looking at, right, okay, is there something I'm lacking? Is it a me issue or is it a them issue? Is it a me in terms of, right, okay, well, I'm not great, or I didn't do a great job at kind of showing how I manage stakeholders or showing how I understand the sector? Or is it a case, well, actually, they just want somebody who's steeped in local government or steeped in the NHS? In which case, well, you just kind of rely on your resilience and accept it's not meant to be. And in the grand scheme of things, that's probably not an environment that you want to put yourselves in if you want to be somebody who progresses. If they're not open to thinking differently, then they're unlikely to open to be doing things differently. And kind of, if you want a leader who wants to drive change, wants to make a difference, is that the environment you want to put yourself in? So sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. Um, so yeah, for me, kind of definitely my advice would be around kind of, yeah, seek the real feedback within that. And don't just take the rejection as a kind of, something that's, in your gift to, something you did. It may be something exactly what they're after, but equally don't just assume kind of, it's all them and there's no room for self-improvement about how you might do things differently. And that's where we're trying to get that feedback. One of the things I've always done, is I've always, sometimes when I've gone for a role, more so when I've kind of maybe not got it as one of the final few candidates, is looked at the CV of who has got it. Normally you have to
Yeah.
wait a few months. And on multiple occasions I've kind of looked at the CV as like, well, actually on paper they look better than me. Don't get me wrong, or they've been an accomplished, you know,
Mm.
um, accomplished at that level far beyond the years that I have. So you're kind of like, well, okay, well, if you put the two on side by side on paper, actually, what, on paper I don't stack up, but that's where you got to then say, well, maybe it was just a case of being, a better candidate on the day than you.
Thanks, Sarfraz. I'll ask, we're coming up to the halfway point of the session, so I'll ask just two more questions. A, because I know you've got other commitments, and B, also to give delegates an opportunity to ask you specific questions about things that are particularly important to them. So, penultimate question for me, Sarfraz, is when we're looking for people to come in, perhaps take a step up in their career from head of service to assistant director or deputy 151 to section 151 in local government, I think there's quite a lot of reluctance or resilience. I think people see it as being perhaps a risky move, perhaps a lot of additional effort, a lot more time and work, perhaps not a huge amount more money in it for them. Or sometimes perhaps we get the feeling that that people are happy where they are. They found their level, they've got the right kind of work-life balance, and that's where they want to be. Obviously, you've sort of taken a slightly different approach and have constantly sort of pushed on to progress fairly regularly. What do you get out of being having a leadership position that gives you the most satisfaction, that you might want to sort of communicate to others as to why they should look at taking the next step in their careers?
Yeah. So one of the things I've always feared, I suppose, in my career is a sense of complacency in myself. And I've always left at the point where I feel like, right, I've done everything I can in this organization, and now it's a case of BAU or kind of routinism. And I think some people like that. I think some people kind of very happy to come in, do a good job, and go home at the end of the day. That doesn't motivate me. Kind of for me, kind of I almost enjoy the thrill of the challenge more. So kind of like, I've been pretty much thrown in the deep end at Wakefield, and I think everybody's slightly kind of saying, "Oh, you've had to think quite a difficult few years." I'm like, yeah, but I don't see that as a bad thing. I'm still smiling, I'm still here, so that kind of says it all. So I think it's understanding what gives you job satisfaction, important bit, and I think um I've interestingly, I did something similar like this last week actually, where on our internal leadership development program they wanted to talk through my career, me to talk my career, and I kind of outlined it. Talked about how I progressed, and they gave me some feedback. I think the facility says, "So, well, how would you describe Sarfraz?" And a few of them said fearless, and I was thinking, oh, I'm probably not fearless. That's not my style. Don't know many accountants are fearless. But what I probably do is kind of have a very different risk appetite, and kind of seek out challenges. And I've come back into local government after a long time, and yeah, you're absolutely spot on. There's probably a lot of people sitting there thinking, "Oh, I don't want that. I don't want that stress." The
Yeah,
benefits or the rewards aren't worth the extra, kind of effort that goes into it. My advice is I think everybody should evaluate kind of, well, what do you want to get out of your career? And I've on multiple occasions kind of taken roles that I knew there probably wasn't longevity in terms of the role, but kind of felt like it was the right move for my career at that point. So one of the golden nuggets I always share this last week is, for me, kind of it's never about the next job, it's about the job after that. How is the next job the
right.
stepping stone to where I want to get to? And I think that's sometimes the next role can be feeling a bit more risky, but it's the thing that the ultimate goal where you want to get to is sometimes why you've got to push through that.
That's really strategic. So you're thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead and just keep moving in the right direction. Okay.
Yeah.
So final question for me, Sarfraz, before we open it up. If you had a magic wand or could turn back time, is there anything you'd change or do differently?
Oh, would I change anything or do differently? Probably not. And for one reason only. I always think sometimes your bad experiences. I always say there's no experience is a bad experience if you. It's only a bad experience if you learn nothing from it. So some of my biggest learning moments have been through bad experiences, and in a way, I'm kind of grateful for them because they then kind of help they help you. It's a bit like, I don't know, if others are parents, sometimes you got to let the kids make the mistake themselves.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like that. Sometimes you got to make your own mistakes to then kind of learn from them and grow from them. So yeah, I don't really, and I'm probably fortunate in that respect. I don't look back and there's many things that I think I would do differently, because yeah, a lot of the time I'm like, well, actually, I did learn something from that. That's then helped me further down the line.
Wise words, Sarfraz. I agree with you completely. I think if you're happy where you are, then you wouldn't want to change anything, because you might not be where you are now, might you? It's a bit philosophical. Fiona, Ben, are you able to see if there's any questions, or is there anything anybody would like to ask Sarfraz or go into in more detail? I think you can either raise your hand for Ben to unmute your microphone, or do drop something in the chat box if you want to type in a question.
Yes, so there's nothing. Sorry, we do have one question. So can you talk us through a typical week, and what does being a CFO look like?
Sure. I think the first thing to say is there's not really a typical week. And I think that's what I really enjoy, actually. It's that I can come in and no 2 days can look the same. And I think that's a lot for kind of, a lot of roles. Um, the things I think I come in that I think I'm going to work on can suddenly become low priority or kind of just get kiboshed by something else. Um, what I'd say is the diary of a CFO looks very meeting heavy. So I'm typically in meetings pretty much from 9 o'clock through to 5 o'clock. I've joked with Nicole, who's my PA, and previously that my working day starts about 5 p.m. Pre that I'm kind of normally sitting in a meeting, um, and kind of, yeah, contributing or chairing a meeting. Interestingly, that was something that really daunted me years ago, and where I felt like I really needed to prep and go into it. But like anything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get into it. Now I don't even think twice about walking into a room with 30 odd people and kind of cheering me, even though, like I tell you, you might not believe it, but I am an introvert. But kind of, one thing I'd say is, yeah, when I was watching people chairing meetings like a CFO years ago, I'm like, I can't do that. I don't think I can do that. And now I don't think twice about it. So yeah, I'd say weeks are meeting heavy. People always asking for approval for something or the other. Typically, there's no money, so a lot of my working week is, how do you get stuff done? How do you manage stakeholder expectations? But equally for me, and it's an important part of me, how do you be a CFO that isn't one that's just seen as a blocker? So I'm a big believer in, whilst yes, you might have to say no, how you say no is the real important bit. So, and that's where the stakeholder management skills come in. That's where the relationships come in, that people know you're doing it for the right reasons, and you take people on that journey about why something might not be feasible. So for me, and it may not be for other CFOs, I typically invest a lot of time in that relationship side and that stakeholder management. I can very easily sit there and fire off a whole load of emails saying, nope, I'm not signing this off. It's taking that time to invest in those relationships, to talk to people through it, that really gets that working relationship working well, and that kind of mutual respect.
Brilliant. And we've had one more question come through, which is, have you any tips for managing the transition from a business partner or similar to a leadership role?
Yeah. So I think it can be a very daunting jump, because you're going from managing yourself to managing others. Um, I think it's a steep learning curve. I'm honest. I'd love to say here that, you go on a CIPFA course or another course and suddenly you become a great leader. That can equip you with the toolkit. And I think, the first thing to say is having that toolkit's important. So yes, kind of do some of that leadership training, but we deal with humans, and every human is different. So there's a level of learning on the job going around kind of leadership skills. One thing I'll say that's worked for me, kind of like, is typically you treat people with basic human principles, and that will go quite far. And I think one of the things that I've done is always observed good leaders. So, I've been fortunate to have good leaders around me that I've either reported to and worked on, I've all kind of really just been a sponge in terms of looking at how they manage, looking at how they lead, picking people's brains about, how are they, what are they doing that I could glean on, so I think rather than recreate the wheel, it's kind of learn from others, develop the toolkit, but equally recognize, you're not going to go in as an accomplished leader, and that's okay. People will respond, but kind of and having some of that humility, I think, will take you a long way. I've seen a number of people go into leadership positions and feel like they've got to be the boss. They've got to, really kind of lead. And it's like, no, you don't. You can gradually step into that place, and leadership comes in different forms. It doesn't need to be that very top-down style. You can be much more collaborative, where you bring people on board, but then ultimately make a decision.
Thanks, Sarfraz. I'm sorry, we've just had one more question come through. Thanks, Leonie. So, what kind of experience would you say is key to stepping up into a leadership role?
And I suppose kind of this goes to, maybe leaving some kind of nuggets with you guys. One thing I look for when I recruit for any kind of leadership is not are you a great accountant, not are you a great business partner, how good are your kind of people skills? We are in the people business. People can be trained to be good technical accountants. Having good people skills is really that gonna be the key decision, key difference maker. And I think if you've got good kind of people skills, and by that I mean kind of like have awareness of others, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, kind of stakeholder management, good communication. I think those are the real kind of attributes that I look for that distinguish somebody who's very competent in their role and doing a technical job or a business partner role. That's somebody that can step into a leadership position and kind of manage others. I tell my direct reports, you've got to manage me. How you manage me is kind of equally important about how you manage your teams as well, and kind of that coaching and guidance. But equally, we're, in finance, we're constantly dealing with numerous stakeholders, and as a finance business partner, you can be dealing with the CEO of an organization, and to do that effectively, having good stakeholder management, communication skills, emotional intelligence are kind of real proper attributes that I think kind of, if you can develop, I would encourage you to develop, because that's what's going to help you succeed in those roles.
Thanks, Sarfraz. Sound advice.
Any more questions?
Any more coming through? No. If there's no more for any more, then don't think there is. No, Sarfraz, thanks so much. I know how busy you are. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to us today, give us an insight into your career journey. Really authentic. Yeah, I'll let you get on with the rest of your evening, and look forward to catching up with you soon. But on behalf of everyone who's attending here today, thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. So, Fiona, it's over to you. We get to turn the tables, ask me some questions about the current state of the finance market and recruitment. And yeah, once again, if delegates could, as we go along, pop questions into the chat box, or save them for later, we'll make sure that we've got 5 or 10 minutes or so, if we need that much, for any questions at the end, just so we can make sure we're covering everything that's of pertinence and importance to everybody. But Fiona, over to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. So we'll start with just kind of taking a snapshot of the market. So what would you say your overall view of the current public finance job market is right now?
I think for the last few years, it's fair to say that there's probably not enough good people to go around. I think particularly across local government, health, housing, those the blue light sector, the kind of sectors that are covered by CIPFA. I think CIPFA, the CIPFA training, the finance training, provides people with a really good finance foundation, which is in demand in other areas, so professional services, private sector, which are often can be better paid. So I think these sectors, particularly local government, do a really good job of training people and giving them that initial experience, and then they can either stay or go off into other sectors. But it can be quite difficult for people to come back. When you combine that with the fact that we're still sort of seeing the effects of post-COVID, I think in that a lot of people have retired, taken early retirement, or moved into consultancy or advisory type roles, particularly for the senior leadership positions. There's definitely not enough good people to go around, and we're seeing that manifested in really short lists. So it's not uncommon for there to be, you know, 1 or 2 candidates for a for a deputy 151 or section 151 or CFO type position. So as a reference at the start, you know, when times are tough, when people are sort of perhaps not putting themselves forward for those roles, that's when there is an opportunity, I think, for others to step up and take advantage of that in their own career progression.
Of course, there you mentioned sort of shortlists and the skills that people need. So what are the specific capabilities that are getting people onto the shortlists?
So obviously that would be role specific. But I think the non-negotiable thing, the thing that makes someone stand out, is if they can talk about with passion, or write if they're putting together a CV or a cover letter, or talk if they're in an interview, passionately about the opportunity they're going for. So to be confident they know what it's about and what excites them about that particular role at that particular point in time, about that particular organization, about that particular type of residents or patients or service users that they'll be working with. You know, there's got to be some point of connection there that elevates it from just being a job that they can do to something they're really excited about doing. They've got to demonstrate that they understand what it's about and what skill set's going to be required for success. And they need to be able to demonstrate that they've got that particular skill set. And that's why it's interesting for them, because they know they're going to be good at it and they know they're going to leverage the skill set and expertise they've got. If they can combine that with being able to evidence that they can make an impact in the job they're doing at the moment, they can improve things, they can improve outcomes for residents, customers, service users. That's a winning combination, whatever level role you go, well, whatever level, whatever sector, whatever function you're going for. I think that really elevates people. We still see a lot of people who will, their CV and their cover letters or application forms will focus on sort of responsibilities. We kind of know what people are doing, what you're responsible for. What we want to see is what you can do with those responsibilities, how you can make a difference.
Yeah, so if you was kind of in that area, you want to get into the market as early as possible to find out the jobs as soon as possible, where do the opportunities surface before they actually advertised, and how would candidates sensibly access them kind of at that pre-market stage?
Pre-market, I would say develop your own network. I think that's why I think something like CIPFA, particularly the regional networks, is really useful, because I think it does, particularly with the combination of online and in-person events. You know, I think every region has at least one sort of annual dinner or conference. It gives you an opportunity to network and to get to know people. So you can identify the kind of people who would have a need for your skill set and get to know them, make sure you're on their radar. Via social media, you can make sure that any sort of particular professional achievements or thought leadership you're doing, you can communicate and broadcast and amplify that to the relevant network. But you know, with the state of the market being as it is, I think you don't necessarily need to be pre-market. There is decreased levels of competition for many finance roles. So I'd say make sure you know people at CIPFA Penna, such as myself, know other recruiters. Make sure you're on their radar. Make sure they know what kind of role you're looking for, and have those conversations so that when they take a brief from a client, or when they're talking to a client who's saying, you know what, we need to sort of upskill in this area or increase our ability over here, you're the person or you're the name that pops into their head, so they reach out and you're first on the list for them to call.
Brilliant. And I know we mentioned before about CVs, but if you're looking at specific sort of public finance roles, what are the top things that make your CV stand out and win that interview?
Again, I think it comes down to impact. So something that's clearly laid out. I'll give you an example. So often when you see a role advertised, it'll say we are such and such type of organization looking for an ambitious, innovative finance professional who has experience of doing in 1, 2 and 3 areas to deliver X, Y and Z. So you want your cover letter and or personal statement or the introductory paragraph in your CV to reflect that. You want to be describing yourself as, if this is you and this is the role you want to go for, you're being authentic and genuine, an innovative and ambitious public finance professional who's working in a similar organization or industry, who has experience of the three or so key areas of expertise they're looking for, and that you mention you've been doing something very similar to what you're going to be asked to deliver in the new role. That will give the person who's reading the your literature, your application, or who will potentially be interviewing you or hiring you, what you want them to think is, crikey, this person's already doing, 50 or 60 or 70% of the job. I want to see them to hear about their experience of doing it and what they'd do differently here if they were going to do that again. So again, I think it comes down to understanding what the role's about and being able to evidence that you can do the majority of the job and demonstrate impact in your current role and communicate that clearly.
And just from your experience in terms of the amount of CVs that you would have looked at, is it obvious to see that someone is authentic and it's genuine, or rather than they've just ticked all the boxes, put the keywords in, or potentially used ChatGPT even?
That's such a good question. So about a month ago, I'd have said, yeah, I can spot people who are fibbing a mile off. But I did interview someone a couple of weeks ago. They bore no relation in person to what we read on paper. So either they'd got someone else to write their application, or they'd got ChatGPT to do it. So yeah, I think there's always going to be a place for the face-to-face interview where people get to be tested, and robustly held to account and all of that. But it's a tool. I would say to job seekers, yeah, you use artificial intelligence sensibly. Don't use it to draft things from scratch. I think you want to start off with things being your own ideas. But I think things like ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot, they can analyze what you've drafted and can give you different or alternative ways of communicating that, of how you lay it out. So use it as a tool to assist rather than using it to do your job for you, because you still want, if I was a candidate going for a job, I'd want to work somewhere because they wanted me, not because they wanted a version of me that didn't exist. Careers are too important for that. Get a job, but not at any cost.
Yeah, and surely it can only get you kind of the first stage. Once that face-to-face element is there, it's gonna catch you out. And in terms of that, if say I'd gone for a senior finance interview and I had 5 days to prepare,
yeah,
how should I spend that time preparing for an interview?
Really good question. So I always advise people, if possible, talk to someone, talk to the hiring manager or talk to the recruiter. Find out what the most important question is. If I was talking to a hiring manager about a job I was going to interview for, what 2 or 3 things are you going to ask the successful candidate to deliver in the first 6 to 12 months? So that's going to tell you what the job's all about. That's going to help you prioritize what to focus on. You can deduce from that, or again, ask them directly. And what are the most important 2 or 3 areas of expertise you need to have confidence that the candidate can do, or that I could do that for you. So that gives you some targets to aim for, both in your application and in the interview. And you can work through how you can then evidence that you possess those areas of expertise or knowledge or skills. The second thing I would do is I would think myself into the job. I would imagine, right, I've already done the interview, got the offer, starting it tomorrow. What does my first day look like? What does my first week, first quarter look like? Do a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. What are you really good at? What do you do at the moment that what best practice are you bringing to the role? It's going to be really straightforward for you, so you've got some easy, quick wins, so you can make a good impression. What are the things you don't know? You've got to be honest with yourself, and there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. You're never going to be up against someone who can do everything. I think once or twice I must have interviewed with a client, a candidate who was perfect. But the response from the client has been, how, can I afford them, and are they going to stay with me? So even if there is a perfect candidate, which there rarely is, they don't necessarily get the job. There's always a sort of a 10 to 20% of stretch or development. So be honest, work out what your development areas are, and think how you could convince someone that they're not going to be an issue. You're not going to drop the ball in those areas, or there are things you can do with training, by getting up to speed with things during your notice period, by perhaps taking a mentor, by going on a CIPFA course. There are things you can do that can enable you over time to close that gap. So often we come across candidates who interview for the job they've got, not the job they're going for. So often, particularly if you're going for a management job, you'll have to do the dreaded presentation anyway at some point. It'd be 4 or 5 PowerPoint slides in front of a selection panel or committee. Often it's a variation of what are you going to do in your first 100 days, or what are your priorities in your first year. So I would do that, whether you're invited for interview or not, assume that you are, and do that presentation. It will help you think yourself into the role. It'll help you identify what you'll be good at, help you identify what you're not going to be good at, so that when that comes up in the interview, you can address it and give people confidence that you know what you're letting yourself in for, and that you're going to get to grips with the development areas. So yeah, hope that answers that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I suppose this question does link in slightly in that, looking at when you are preparing for that interview and you want your story bank and your evidence there, what would you say the sort of 5 to 6 kind of stories should every candidate be looking at, having them ready just to get there? Any question that comes, you've got them ready.
Yeah, that's so important to have. I'd say 2 or 3 is probably ample as a baseline, because a lot of interviews is about confidence, and once you get off, once you get off to a good start, you tend to find that you're away and things tend to sort of improve. First impressions are really important. You only get one chance at a first impression, so if you've got those 2 or 3 things that you know you want to talk about, that they're probably going to come up in the first couple of questions, that means you can walk into the room with confidence, knowing that they're not going to ask you anything you can't handle. So I think a typical first question is, tell us why you've applied for the job, or what excites you most about the opportunity. You don't necessarily need to have a sort of an example or case study of achievement for that, but it's something to prepare. Other areas that typically come up for sort of every finance role would include leadership. So being able to talk about how you would lead people, or have led to deliver performance improvement. Often there's aspects of transformation or change in leadership roles, so being able to talk about how you've led or supported that. Typically, if you're talking about leadership roles, it'll be how you engage with, from a governance point of view, either with elected members or politicians, or perhaps trustees or governors or board members, how you work with them. Increasingly with partnership, with leadership roles, it's how you work with partners. So they'll ask a question about leadership. How do you manage those who report to you? Partnership is more about working with external stakeholders. You may have the same objectives, but they don't report to you, so you have to influence and coerce rather than manage. So how do you work together towards a shared goal? I think those are probably the constants that would come up.
And I suppose if you are going for that job, that's the level above. If there is the questions that come up where you don't necessarily have examples, is it best just to be honest, or is it the best idea to kind of scramble around to try and put some brief example together?
Oh, that's so good, because I mean, define being honest. I think you have to be realistic, and I hope I'm not fudging it. But I think one of the biggest traps candidates fall into is not putting themselves forward for a role because they look at the person specification. It says you must have experience of this, you must have done that, you must have done the other, and they think, well, I haven't done that job before, and I haven't done that bit, and I haven't done that, and they don't have the confidence to go for it. But often, if you think about what you may not have done all of those components in the same job or in exactly the same circumstances or situation. You may have very relevant transferable expertise where you've done something similar. You may have been able to step into your line manager's shoes and have responsibility, or acted up on a temporary basis. I do a lot of recruitment for local governments, and often the requirement is to have experience in a political organisation and work with elected members. That's because that's the phrasing and words they use. I wouldn't discount a candidate coming from the NHS who's worked with board members, because they're the proxy for elected members. So I think what you've got to do is work out how you satisfy the criteria and in what ways, and present that in an acceptable, honest, and realistic way, without misrepresenting anything.
Yeah,
I think the key word is misrepresenting.
Yeah.
Talk to a lot of candidates who get the job, I think confidence is key to getting the offer. If you're not confident about your ability to do the job, then it's going to be very difficult for a hiring manager to have the confidence you can do the job. And I think it's a stereotype that men tend to sort of blag it a bit, whereas women tend to be more realistic. I think it's not quite as black and white in that, but there is some definite truth in the fact that the people who are more confident or optimistic about their abilities will do better in interviews than people who perhaps are less confident about their abilities.
Yeah. And no, thank you. You did answer that really well. And I suppose in terms of references and reputation, so how much does an informal reference and online footprint actually matter, and how should candidates manage that in an ethical way?
Yeah. So I suppose informal references, social media, online, it's not going to get you they're not going to get you the job, but they will lose you the offer.
Yeah.
I think increasingly, so we recruit for a lot of politically or security sensitive roles, and I think before anyone is recommended for interview, as a matter of course, we're looking at all publicly available information that's online in the media, social media, to identify potential causes of reputational risk for our clients. So I would say, yeah, best practice is to not have an online footprint, but I realise that's not possible for most people. But yeah, it's definitely something you want to bear in mind.
Brilliant. And I guess looking at kind of the flexibility and structure around the working world at the minute, especially post-COVID, how are employees actually weighing up the hybrid and on-site expectations? Is there flexibility? Is it non-negotiables? And I suppose the 4-day working pattern at a senior level as well, relocation, how are those things kind of, is there any trends at the moment, or is it a key focus?
So I think it's still important to a lot of people. They want to have some flexibility and autonomy over how they work, and no one wants to go into an empty office just to sit by themselves and have Teams meetings with other people who aren't there. I think the trend now is probably for teams to be on site and working together more often than not, particularly for leadership roles. The phrase we're hearing increasingly is visible leadership. I think people accept that to fulfill the full sort of leadership role, both in terms of having access to information, intelligence, feeling, you need to be in the same room as people, you need to be able to meet people, get to know them properly. And to provide leadership, you need to be able to perhaps to see your team and to understand, how they're feeling, what their needs are, to give them what they're looking for. And increasingly, I think we're talking to candidates who, they don't need a job, they've got one more often than not. I don't come across many finance people who are unemployed. It's a good sector to be in from that point of view. So when we're offering them a role, it's often got to, it's got to be a better proposition than what they've got at the minute. So if they're going to go for it, they're going to want to be successful at it. And they're saying something along the lines of, if I'm going to go for this role, I want to give myself the best possible chance of being successful. So, and that's going to require being there. So I think there are some locations where they have to be a bit more flexible and a bit more realistic, recruiting for clients in Cornwall, the far northeast, the far northwest, Cumbria. That's quite difficult because unless you live in Truro, you're not going to work in Truro. It's too far from anywhere else, and you can't sort of hop on a train and be there in 20 or 30 minutes. But pretty much for everyone else, for the other sort of 85% of the country, I think 3, probably 4 days a week on site is becoming norm probably for leadership roles.
Brilliant. And in terms of, like you say, the public sector, what is realistically negotiable, and sort of what, if you got the offer, what is the right way to negotiate?
It's difficult. I think for every individual, there's probably a different way of doing it. The way we handle it at CIPFA Penna is obviously all the roles we advertise will be advertised with a salary, if not in the advert, then on the job description or in the candidate pack, so people can see what level it's being pitched at. Often there is a level of flex, or at least we can ask, because the clients want to get the best possible person, and you don't want to lose out on a candidate for the sake of 5 to 10% of the salary. So when we're talking to prospective applicants and we've got applications coming in, we're very mindful that we ask what people's salary expectations are. We'll before we invite people for interview, we'll ask them to confirm current earnings and expectations for a future role in writing, and we'll have an open, upfront discussion about that, both with their candidates and with our clients, so that if people are moving forward, they know that their expectations are in the right ballpark. What we don't want is for either party to have a surprise at the end, either that the client really likes someone that they can't afford, or the candidate thinks they're going to get an offer for a job they're really, really excited about, but it's not going to be the financial package that they want, that they get lowballed. So that's how we manage things in a very, it's in a confidential but nevertheless open and transparent way, so that we don't really arrive in a situation where there's a negotiation. We were able to select the right candidate based on merit. We know what they want, and we'll do everything we can to get them that offer from the client.
Perfect. And you'll be pleased to know that this is the last question. But from your vantage point, what are the 3 most common reasons that strong candidates do miss out, and how should they avoid this?
Oh, good question. How do they miss out? First, obvious one, not applying. Got to be in it to win it. Yeah, I think I can think of quite a few candidates at the moment who, they decided not to go for a role, and they've seen who got the job, and they think, actually, I could have done that. Like what Sarfraz was saying about seeing, checking out on LinkedIn who got the job you thought you were going to go for, and then realizing, actually, yeah, that could have been me. So that's the first one. Got to go for it. Secondly, preparation, I suppose. Again, that motivation, knowing what you're going for, knowing why you want it, is really important. The leadership roles, we spend a lot of time working with people at that level, colleagues and partners, and people we work with, who we hire for, they want to work with people who are passionate about the role, who know about the organisation. The interviews we run are not tests of what you know of the organisation, but typically the first question is, why do you want to work here, or why do you want the job? And that's your opportunity to sell yourself, to say why it's exciting, how you're going to use that opportunity to deliver to deliver value, benefit, improved outcomes. So do the proper research. Is there a third one? I can't think of one at the minute, but if it comes to me,
I don't have to force you to get a third. Yeah, you've covered a lot there, so that's great. But yeah, like you said, that was all the questions, and thank you for that. That's really insightful. I know I've certainly learned a lot anyway.
I hope you won't be leaving CIPFA now, Fiona, to be armed with this new information.
I know how to apply for jobs now, so all set. But yeah, like you said, that was really useful. And now I suppose it's a turn for a Q&A. Andy's here, so any questions that anyone's got, either put them in the chat or put your hand up, and we'll make our way to you. So here we are. So Leonie, thank you. So Andy, you gave some tips on what to do if you don't have specific experience, which was helpful for me, as my next step up is a big jump and will be my first leadership role. So there's a lot of experience I won't have. Have you found that hiring managers will take a chance on someone who hasn't had a leadership role before? Thanks, Leonie.
Yes, good question. Great question. I think hiring managers will. Everybody has to, everyone who's in a management position, someone's had to take for want of a better phrase, take a punt on them. So I think it's ideal to do it in the organisation where you are currently. Well, there's pros and cons to everything. If you're working with an organisation, you have a supportive manager, I think there's the opportunity there for them to, what's the phrase? Let you step into their shoes. So if you look at the job description for person specification for the first leadership role, you can identify there the things that you need to have experience of, or the things that you will need to talk about at the job interview. So there'll probably be 3, 4, 5, 6 areas of expertise there that you'll need to work out how to get to grips with. And what you want to do is work with either your line manager or colleague, or perhaps a mentor, and say, well, look, how do I get exposure to these areas? How can I if you're head of service and you need to be able to talk about working with elected members in local government, can you present a paper to cabinet or to a committee? Can you attend meetings with the portfolio holder? Can you cover for your deputy 151 on occasion? What are those opportunities where you can put your hand up and say, look, I can do that. And yeah, don't be shy in as I was also saying, don't be shy in coming forward, or don't look backwards in going forward. Put yourself out there. If there aren't those opportunities to do that, I think you have to be perhaps more proactive about looking for other opportunities or training or development provision that may be available through CIPFA or through others. Or, as I say, take a mentor and take their advice on how to develop those skills gaps. Most important thing, I think, is to be proactive, as it sounds you are. Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked the question, wouldn't be here. Plan it and know what it is that you need to get to grips with. Because just by going to an interview and saying, well, look, I know that these are my development areas, and that's what I'm working on. And if I was successful in the role, this is where I'd be focusing my attention. This is what I'd be doing to make sure that I didn't drop the ball there.
Thanks, Andy. And the next question is, how would you recommend approaching any feelings of guilt towards existing colleagues when considering new opportunities?
Oh my God, I don't come across that personally. That's a good question. Guilt. What do I think? I think so. I guess you're talking about where there's perhaps 3 or 4 people at the same level, and there's one opportunity to step up, and one can get it, and 2 or 3 are going to be disappointed. And I think if I to answer it perfectly honestly and personally, you can, and I'd give this advice to any candidate going for any role, because often as recruiters we get a lot of questions about who else is going for it, how many candidates are they at the same level as me, am I the only step up candidate? So look, if you want this, all you can think about is yourself and communicating and representing the value you could bring to the role, how you go about the job. Ultimately, it's not your decision, it's the hiring manager's decision, and they'll make the best decision for you, for the others, for the organisation. It's not a zero-sum game. There are other opportunities and other organisations for other candidates, and they may be better. Quite often, I've worked with candidates who've come second or worse in a process, and they've been terribly glum and disappointed about it. But there's always another opportunity with another organisation coming down the road, and often they've got better, what I consider to be not necessarily better paid exclusively, but better opportunities come along which they've secured shortly thereafter. So yeah, I think you need to be as you clearly are by asking the question, mindful of the sort of interrelationships. But I think, yeah, guilt is yeah, perhaps not the right word. I don't know.
Thanks for that, Stuart, as well. And next question from Charlie. Thank you, Charlie. What's the #1 emerging skill in the public finance sector that you think will be the most important or sought after by recruiters in the next 10 years?
So like Sarfraz said, I think it's about, I think he said, it's about the narrative, it's about relationships. Particularly in finance leadership, it's not about the numbers. If you're a CFO dealing with spreadsheets, you're doing the wrong thing. What you need to be able to do is understand the implications of the numbers. What are the numbers telling you? What are the various scenarios? And look forward in the future, 1, 3, 5, 10 years. And then how do you communicate that to the various stakeholders? How do you influence? How do you have those difficult conversations with people? Local government is constantly, the question we have for aspirant finance directors is, you've got a meeting with the Director of Children's Services, they've got to save £10 million off their budget for next year. But they're adamant that children are going to die if that's what they do. So where does the conversation go from there? So it's the analysis, implications, the forecast, the forecasting, the relationship management, the communication. That's the key thing.
Thank you. And last question, which come through from Jill. So can you recommend how long should a CV be, and any tips on how to be concise?
Depends how much experience you've got, I guess. I think two sides typically does it for me. I think if it's anything, as recruiters, the most important thing we're looking at is what you're doing now, because we want to see a correlation between that and the job you're going for. We don't want it to be exactly the same as, we want there to be a bit of development or growth. Otherwise, what's in it for you? Why would you be, are you going to be committed to that role for 3, 4, 5 years? If there's not enough there that's different. So you want to have a good description of what you're doing there. And you want to be able to, you want to see what your narrative is and see that the CV depicts that story. So it could be that, you've sort of progressed every 2 or 3 years. It could be that you've had general progression, steady progression through one organization. It may be, your story may be that, like Sarfraz, that you've worked in different sectors. So think through how you communicate that story in 2 or 3 sides. As I said, use technology, use ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot to sort of analyze your CV and give you suggestions as to how you could improve it from a visual point of view, or look at different styles or layouts to get the message across. Does that? I'll scroll up and just read the full message in the chat box. Check I've answered it.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of bullet points. Again, impact. Numbers are really good, really unambiguous. Nothing worse as a recruiter when someone says, and we delivered and it was better. Well, define better. We need a number. We need a percentage or a proportion or a ratio or a pound sign. We need some context. What you want when you're telling someone your example or your achievement, or you're writing in your CV what you did, you want them to think, crikey, you did that there. You'll have no problem doing what I need here then. That's the kind of reaction you want to aim for in their head.
Thank you. And the last question, which has just come through. So Natalie's asked, can you recommend any training for aspiring CFOs?
We can, can't we, Fiona? I think there's at least 2 programs that CIPFA provide.
There is, yeah.
One is by Brendan McCarran. It's McCarran, isn't it? I think the aspiring CFO, and the other is the CFO Academy. Natalia, I can find details. I can send you the web links from the CIPFA website.
I was going to say, yeah, if you have a look on the website, there is some stuff there, so we'll try and find those links for you. And if not, message us afterwards, and we will get those sent to you as well.
Yeah, but certainly we're also looking at putting together some either small group training or one-to-one coaching, as well as doing a mentor matchmaking service for people who want to make that step up. So yeah, contact me separately and we'll take that forward.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think you've survived all the questions, Andy. So hopefully that wasn't too much of an. I was going to say it's a bit of an interview for you tonight, isn't it? But yeah, thank you for that. That's great. And if there is any last questions, I think that is everything. There we are. Ben's put some of the links in the chat as well. Thanks, Ben. But yeah, thanks, Andy. Really appreciate that. And I suppose any closing remarks from yourself there?
No, just as I said at the outset, thank you very much for your time. I generally get how busy you all are, the demands on your time. Really appreciate you making the effort to attend something like this. I hope it's been useful. If a conversation about career progression or opportunities or what you can do to progress your career would be useful, do reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn or through the CIPFA Penna website. I'd be delighted to be of any help that I can, or tell you of roles that are coming up.
Great, thanks, Andy. And like you say, from ourselves, this is recorded, so hopefully we'll be able to either get this to go and sit on the website so you can watch it back. But like I say, any questions, obviously let Andy know, or get in contact with CIPFA and we'll be able to support you from there. So thanks everyone, appreciate it. It's 6:10 now.
Closing comment, perhaps we can do the next one in 6 months' time in person.
That's a very good point, yeah. There we are, sort of the next one for 6 months' time then.
Yeah, let Ben or Fiona know if you'd be happy to attend. Yeah. And if we get a critical mass, that would be something we'd really like to do. Yeah.
And we might have some case studies of people who've come from this webinar and got the next step up as well. So it can be the next case study on that. So yeah, thank you everyone. Appreciate the time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Right.
Bye bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye.